now on you are mine." A lonely cowboy found a native woman at the station and took her home. Jack Callahan rode along the dusty, sun-baked path, his horse's hooves kicking up little clouds of sand and gravel with every step. The frontier stretched endlessly in every direction, a mix of wide open plains, patches of scrubby trees, and rolling hills that shimmered in the heat. For years, Jack had traveled this land alone, working odd jobs on ranches, helping with cattle drives, and sometimes guiding travelers through the open country. But the loneliness had grown like a shadow that followed him everywhere. The horizon was beautiful, yes, but empty, and Jack often found himself wishing for even a single person to talk to, someone who understood the silence he carried inside. He had reached a small rail station in the middle of nowhere, one of those wooden platforms that looked older than the trains that stopped there. The building was low, with a sagging roof and chipped paint, and the boards creaked under his boots as he walked. The sun was high in the sky, beating down with a dry heat that made the air shimmer. Jack dismounted, tightened the reins around his horse's neck, and tied the animal to a post. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and scanned the platform, expecting only the usual travelers, maybe a tired worker or two. That's when he saw her. A woman stood at the far end of the platform, alone. She was native, her skin warm and golden under the sunlight, her dark hair braided neatly over her shoulder. Her clothes were simple but clean, a muted dress that hinted at careful preparation, not casual travel. Up, she looked out toward the horizon with an expression that was calm, yet something in her eyes suggested caution. She wasn't like anyone Jack had met before, and in that moment, he felt an unusual tug at his chest, an awareness of someone else's presence in a world that often felt empty. Jack approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Miss," he said politely, tipping his hat, "are you waiting for the train?" The woman turned toward him, her dark eyes meeting his. There was a flash of surprise, and maybe a little wariness. "Yes," she said softly. Her voice was calm but carried a tone that hinted she didn't usually rely on strangers. "I'm traveling alone." Jack nodded, understanding more than he could explain. Traveling alone on the frontier was no easy task. Bandits, wild animals, harsh weather. Life had a way of testing those who walked it alone. "I know that road," he said quietly. "It's not easy for someone to be alone out here." Her gaze softened slightly, but she didn't speak. Jack could tell she was considering whether he was trustworthy. He didn't blame her. Out here, it wasn't safe to trust anyone too quickly. Still, there was something in her stance, a quiet strength that made him curious. Most people waiting at this station seemed nervous or fidgety, looking around as if the wind itself might carry danger. But she stood calm, rooted to the spot, almost as if she belonged to the land itself. The whistle of the train in the distance made the wooden platform vibrate under Jack's boots. He looked down at his own hands, calloused from years of handling ropes and reins, and felt a sudden, odd urge to offer help. "Where are you headed?" he asked carefully. She hesitated, then answered, "I'm trying to reach a town west of here. My family. They moved ahead, and I lost track of the train that was supposed to bring me." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet sense of dislocation, of being caught between places. Jack could understand that feeling. He had spent much of his life moving from one place to another, never settling, always alone. The train arrived with a long, grinding whistle, slowing as it approached the station. Steam hissed from the engine, making the air thick and warm. Jack noticed how the woman flinched at the noise, gripping the edge of her dress. He stepped closer, offering a gentle reassurance. "If you want, I can give you a ride. I'm headed toward a ranch not far from here." It's safe, and you won't have to worry about the land alone." She looked at him, a mixture of surprise and hesitation crossing her face. I don't know you," she said quietly. "I know," Jack replied, his tone calm and even. "And that's fair. But sometimes strangers are the ones who can help the most." She studied him for a long moment. Jack could feel her weighing the risks, trying to decide if she could trust him. The train's whistle called again, long and mournful, as if echoing the uncertainty between them. Finally, she gave a small nod. "All right," she said. "I'll go with you, but only because there's no other choice right now." Jack tipped his hat again, a small smile on his face. "That's all I ask," he said. "I promise I'll make sure you're safe." The journey back to Jack's wagon was quiet at first. The woman kept her eyes on the horizon, occasionally glancing at him with curiosity. Jack didn't push her to talk. He knew that sometimes silence was more comfortable than words. The horse plodded steadily along the dirt path, hooves raising little clouds of dust in the dry air. Occasionally a breeze rustled through the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers, a reminder of how alive this land could be despite its harshness. Slowly, small pieces of conversation began to emerge. Jack learned her name was Ayana, which meant eternal bloom in her native tongue. She spoke with a soft confidence, sharing stories of her childhood in the hills, of her family moving for work, and of the small joys and struggles she faced along the way. Jack listened, genuinely interested, and found himself laughing at a few of her dry, clever jokes. It had been years since he had spoken to someone who could make him smile without pretense. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the plains with shades of gold and orange. Jack guided his horse toward a small trail leading to his ranch. The land became a mix of open fields and scattered trees, the kind of place where a person could feel both isolated and at peace. He glanced at Ayana, noticing the way her eyes softened as she took in the vastness around them. "You've been out here before?" she asked quietly. Jack nodded. "Most of my life. It's not always easy, but it's home, in a way." She smiled faintly. "It's beautiful." "It is," he agreed. "But sometimes it feels too quiet, too lonely." She turned her gaze to him, studying him in a way that made Jack suddenly self-conscious. "Loneliness can teach you things," she said softly. "But it can also make people do things they might regret." Jack nodded, taking her words to heart. He had spent so long alone that the idea of connecting with someone felt both exciting and frightening. He wasn't used to the thought of another person entering his life in any meaningful way. But as he looked at her, her presence was like a gentle warmth in the cold expanse he had known for so long. By the time the ranch came into view, a modest cabin surrounded by fences and a few outbuildings, the sky had turned a deep shade of amber. The wind carried the faint scent of hay and livestock, a comforting smell that reminded Jack of simpler times. He slowed the horse, letting it drink from a small trough near the cabin, and turned to Ayana. "We're here," he said. She looked around, taking in the simple home, the land stretching endlessly behind it. "It's different," she said, her voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. Jack gave a small shrug, smiling faintly. "It's simple, but it's safe, and for now, that's what matters." Ayana nodded, and for a moment the two of them simply stood there, taking in the quiet beauty of the land, the soft rustling of the grass, and the warm glow of the setting sun. Neither spoke, but both felt a subtle connection forming, one born out of shared solitude and the unspoken understanding that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could change a life forever. As evening settled in, Jack led the horse to the stable, and Ayana followed, still cautious but willing to see what lay ahead. The wind whispered through the open fields, carrying the promise of a new chapter, one that neither of them could fully understand yet, but one that felt, in some unspoken way, meant to be. The evening air was soft, carrying the scents of dry grass and the distant river, as Jack led his horse into the small stable behind the cabin. Ayana walked behind him, careful with each step, her eyes taking in everything: the wooden beams, the tools hanging on the walls, the smell of hay mixed with the lingering warmth of the day. The ranch was modest, not fancy, but it had a sense of quiet safety that the station and the open road could never offer. Jack tied the horse to a post and patted its neck, speaking softly to calm it after the long journey. "She's tired," he said, glancing at Ayana. "You should rest too. It's been a long day." Ayana nodded but didn't move immediately. Instead, she looked around the stable, her fingers brushing lightly over the rough wood of the fence. "It's different from the town I came from," she said finally. Her voice carried no judgment, only curiosity. "It feels older, quieter, like it's always been this way." Jack chuckled softly. "It has. Some people think it's lonely. I've thought that too. But there's peace here, if you know how to find it." She smiled faintly, a little uncertain. "Peace, yes, I think I understand." The two of them walked toward the cabin. Jack opened the door and stepped inside first, letting Ayana follow. The interior was small but cozy. A wooden table sat in the center of the room, a few chairs pushed neatly beneath it. A fireplace dominated one wall, still warm from the fire he had kept burning that afternoon. Ayana's eyes moved from corner to corner, noticing the simplicity of the place, the neatness, and the lack of unnecessary things. "I'll show you your room," Jack said. He led her to a small bedroom at the back, furnished with a single bed, a chest for clothes, and a small window that looked out over the fields. "It's simple, but it'll do for now." Ayana entered quietly, taking a moment to study the room. She set down her bag and looked back at him. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know it's strange for someone to take me in like this." Jack shrugged, trying to make his expression casual, though a warmth spread through his chest. "Maybe, but you're safe here. That's what matters." She nodded again, hesitating as if unsure how to continue. Finally, she asked, "Do you live alone here?" "Yes," he replied, a little defensively at first, then softer. "Mostly. Sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it's too quiet." Ayanda's eyes softened. "I understand that feeling. I've been alone a lot too, even with people around." For a moment, silence settled between them, comfortable, but full of unspoken thoughts. Jack noticed the way her hands rested lightly on the edge of the bed, the quiet strength in her posture. He realized that this woman, who had seemed so fragile at the station, was strong in ways he hadn't expected. They ate a simple supper together, bread and stew Jack had prepared earlier. The fire crackled softly in the background, filling the room with warmth. Ayana was quiet at first, but Jack found that talking about simple things, how he managed the ranch, how the seasons changed the land, helped her feel more at ease. She began to share small stories too, about her childhood near the river, the animals she had known, and the lessons her family had taught her. "You're very knowledgeable about the land," Jack said, genuinely impressed. Ayana smiled, a little shyly. "We have to be. The land is everything. You respect it, or it can be cruel." Jack nodded, understanding more than he could say. He had spent years on the frontier, learning the same lesson in his own way. respecting the land, the animals, the weather, the people. These were the things that kept a man alive out here. But there was another lesson he hadn't learned until now: how to respect another person's heart. After supper, Jack suggested they take a short walk outside. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the sun slowly dipping below the horizon. Ayana followed him, her steps quiet on the soft dirt path. They walked toward a small hill overlooking the fields, the wind brushing against their faces. "The view is beautiful," Ayana said softly, her eyes taking in the golden light on the fields. "Yes," Jack replied, feeling a rare peace. "It's one of the reasons I stay." They stood together in silence for a few minutes, listening to the soft rustle of the grass and the distant call of birds settling in for the night. Jack felt a connection forming, one that was unspoken but powerful. He realized that Ayana's presence brought a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a reminder that human companionship could be as comforting as the land itself. "I've traveled a lot," Jack said quietly, breaking the silence. "Most of the time I keep to myself, but it's not always easy being alone." Ayana looked at him, understanding in her eyes. "Loneliness can teach you patience," she said. "It can teach you to notice things, to listen, but it can also make your heart heavy." Jack nodded slowly. Her words resonated with him. He had felt that heaviness for a long time, carrying it silently across the plains, thinking it was just part of his life. But now, standing here with her, he wondered if it was possible to share that burden, even just a little. As the night settled in, Jack led her back to the cabin. They passed through the small kitchen where the fire had died down to glowing embers. The cabin felt peaceful, safe, and surprisingly welcoming with her there. Jack showed her where she could wash up and gave her a clean blanket for the bed. "You can rest now," he said gently. "Tomorrow is a new day. We'll figure out the rest together." Ayana nodded, her eyes reflecting the soft firelight. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack watched her for a moment, then turned away to tend to his own chores. He felt a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness. It had been so long since he had shared his space with anyone else. Having someone here, even someone cautious and independent like Ayana, made the ranch feel alive in a way he hadn't realized it needed. The next morning the sun rose slowly over the plains, casting long shadows across the fields. Jack was already up, checking on the animals and preparing breakfast. Ayana came out of the cabin shortly after, her movements careful but confident. She had already taken a walk outside, surveying the land, and she carried herself with a quiet grace that reminded Jack of the strength he had noticed at the station. "Good morning," Jack said, tipping his hat. "Good morning," Ayana replied, smiling faintly. She glanced at the horses and cattle. "You take very good care of them." "I try," Jack said, smiling back. "It's important. They're part of the land, just like we are." They worked side by side that morning, feeding the animals, repairing a broken fence, and preparing the fields for planting. The tasks gave them a natural rhythm to their day, a way to communicate without always needing words. Jack began to see how compatible their skills and temperaments were. Ayana was careful and thoughtful, while he was practical and experienced. Together they formed a quiet, efficient partnership that made even the hard work feel lighter. By midday they paused under the shade of a large tree, drinking water and sharing simple conversation. Ayana spoke of the plants she had seen on her journey, of the small animals and birds that marked the seasons. Jack listened, fascinated by her observations, and found himself learning things he had overlooked in years of solitary work. "You notice things others might miss," he said finally. Ayana shrugged slightly. "You have to, when you're alone in the wild." Every sound, Every shadow, it matters. Jack nodded. He realized then that he was not just protecting her, he was also learning from her, growing in ways he hadn't expected. The loneliness that had once felt like a permanent companion was slowly being replaced by the presence of someone who could understand the land, and him, in ways few ever could. As the sun began to dip again, painting the sky with orange and purple, they returned to the cabin, tired but satisfied with the day's work. Ayana moved through the kitchen helping with dinner, her presence natural and unassuming. Jack felt a quiet gratitude for her, a realization that life could be different with someone by your side, not controlling, not demanding, but sharing and learning together. That night, they sat by the fire, the glow reflecting in their eyes. Jack spoke little, but each word carried thought and care. Ayana listened and responded with her usual quiet confidence, their conversation flowing easily, punctuated by laughter and moments of reflection. For the first time in years, Jack felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that the frontier might not be as lonely as he had once believed. He looked at Ayana, understanding that their connection was fragile but promising, a bond formed not out of need or obligation, but out of respect and curiosity. As the fire died down, they prepared for sleep, each in their own space but aware of the other's presence. The night was calm, filled with the distant sounds of animals and the whispering wind. Jack lay awake for a while, thinking about the journey ahead, the challenges they might face, and the unexpected companionship that had entered his life. For the first time in a long while, the frontier felt alive, and Jack realized that perhaps this chance encounter at the station was only the beginning of something far greater than he had imagined. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting long golden beams across the fields and making the dew on the grass shimmer like tiny jewels. Jack was up before the light fully broke, moving quietly so as not to disturb Ayana. The animals needed attention, and there was always work to be done. Yet, this morning felt different. With Ayana at the cabin, the ranch no longer felt empty. Her presence had already begun to change the rhythm of his days, and Jack felt a strange warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Ayana emerged from the cabin, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She carried herself with quiet confidence, moving through the yard as if she had always belonged to this place, though it was new to her. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm assurance Jack had come to admire. "Morning," Jack replied with a small smile. "I already fed the horses and checked the cattle. Thought I'd let you handle the chickens today." Ayana tilted her head, amused. "The chickens? All right, lead the way." They walked toward the coop together, and she began her work with careful precision, gathering eggs and checking the hens. Jack watched her, noticing the way her hands moved with steady confidence, the way she observed the animals as if she could understand their moods. It was impressive. Though she had spent much of her life far from ranch life, she adapted quickly, learning from him while also showing her own knowledge of the land and its creatures. "You're a quick learner," Jack said after a while, handing her a basket. Ayana shrugged. "I've had to learn quickly before. Life doesn't wait." Jack nodded, thinking of the long, lonely years he had endured. He realized that this woman, so calm and capable, could handle more than he had first assumed. Yet there was a softness to her as well, a kindness that softened even the rough edges of his solitude. By mid-morning they had finished the chores, and Jack suggested they take a break. They sat under the shade of an old oak tree, the wind rustling the leaves above them. Ayana leaned back, letting out a small sigh of contentment. "It's peaceful here," she said. "Quieter than anywhere I've been before." "It is," Jack agreed. It's a hard life sometimes, but it has its rewards." He hesitated, then added, "I haven't had many people around to share it with. It's different with you here." Ayana looked at him, her dark eyes calm and thoughtful. "I know what you mean. I've been alone a lot too, even in places with people around. There's a difference between being with someone and truly being seen." Jack smiled faintly, understanding her words more than she might have realized. It was true. His life had been full of people passing through, cowboys, travelers, ranch hands, but no one had ever shared his solitude in a meaningful way. Ayana's presence wasn't just company. It was a connection, subtle but real, that made him feel less alone without taking away his independence. As the afternoon wore on, Jack decided to show Ayana more of the land. They walked along a dirt trail leading to a small stream that ran through the property. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and birds called from the trees along the banks. Ayana knelt by the stream, cupping her hands to drink the clear, cool water. Jack watched her, admiring the way she interacted with the land, not as an intruder, but as someone who respected it. "You're good with nature," Jack said quietly. Ayana looked up at him and smiled faintly. "I had to be. The land teaches you many lessons if you pay attention." Jack nodded, realizing how much he had learned from her already in just a day. She saw things he often overlooked: the subtle signs of changing weather, the movement of small animals, the health of the plants and trees. Her knowledge complemented his own experience, and together they made the land feel alive in a new way. Returning to the cabin as the sun dipped lower, they began the evening chores. Jack tended to the livestock while Ayana prepared a simple meal, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. There was a sense of harmony building between them, a quiet understanding that went beyond words. Jack felt a protective instinct toward Ayana, but it was different from the loneliness-driven possessiveness he had feared. He simply wanted her to be safe and comfortable, and her presence brought a sense of purpose he hadn't realized he had been missing. After dinner, they sat on the porch, the night air cool against their skin. Stars dotted the sky like scattered diamonds, and the quiet hum of crickets filled the air. Jack leaned back, glancing at Ayana. "Do you ever miss home?" he asked. She considered the question for a moment. "Sometimes," she said finally, "but home can mean many things. It can be where your family is, where your heart feels safe, or even where the land feels right." "I think I'm starting to understand that." Jack nodded. "I know what you mean. I've wandered a lot, but I never really felt at home anywhere until now, maybe." He paused, unsure if he should say more. "Having someone to share it with, it changes everything." Ayana's gaze softened, and she smiled faintly. "It does, but it has to be done carefully. You can't rush these things." Jack understood. There was no need to rush. The connection they were building was delicate and precious, and it deserved time and respect. He realized that his own heart, long hardened by years of solitude, was beginning to open in ways he hadn't expected. The next few days passed in a comfortable rhythm. Jack and Ayana worked the ranch together, sharing tasks and learning from each other. Ayana's presence brought a new energy to the place. She noticed details Jack had long overlooked: the way the soil needed tending, the subtle signs of animal illness, the patterns of the wind that could signal coming storms. In turn, Jack taught her the practical skills he had honed over years: how to ride the horses with care, how to mend fences efficiently, and how to predict the weather from the clouds and wind. Their partnership was not without small tensions. Ayana was independent and proud, and Jack sometimes struggled to reconcile his instinct to protect with her desire to do things herself. But they navigated these moments with patience, learning to respect each other's strengths and boundaries. Each challenge became a small lesson, building trust and understanding between them. One evening, after a long day of work, Jack found Ayana sitting on a fence post, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. He joined her, and they sat in companionable silence, letting the colors of the sky fill the moment. "You've made this place feel alive," he said quietly. Ayana turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "And you've shown me that, even in the quietest places, there's strength and beauty. We've both found something here, haven't we?" Jack nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. "We have." That night, as they prepared for bed, Jack realized that the loneliness that had defined his life was slowly lifting. Ayana's presence was not just companionship. It was a reminder that even in the vast, untamed frontier, human connection could grow. It required patience, understanding, and respect, but it was possible. And for the first time in years, Jack felt hopeful about the future. They settled into their separate spaces for the night, yet both were aware of the other nearby. There was a sense of peace, a quiet anticipation that tomorrow would bring more work, more shared moments, and perhaps deeper understanding. Jack drifted off to sleep thinking about how the ranch had changed with Ayana's presence, not just the land, but himself as well. In the days that followed, their bond strengthened through shared effort and small joys. Jack found himself laughing more, talking more, and noticing the subtle ways Ayana brought life to the ranch. She had a way of seeing the land, the animals, and even him with a perspective that was gentle but honest. It was a partnership built on respect and care, and it reminded Jack that companionship could be both strong and gentle at the same time. By the end of the week, it was clear that their lives had intertwined in ways neither of them had expected. Jack no longer felt the same heavy solitude that had once been his constant companion. Ayana, though still cautious, had begun to feel a sense of belonging. Together, they had created a rhythm, a partnership that balanced work and care, strength and trust, and though they both knew the challenges of life on the frontier were far from over, they also knew that facing them together made the journey not just bearable, but meaningful. The ranch, once a place of quiet isolation, had become a home, not only in the practical sense, but in the deeper emotional sense that comes from sharing one's life with another human being. The days at the ranch passed in a steady rhythm, the sun rising and falling over the wide plains, painting the land with warm gold and soft pinks. Jack and Ayana worked side by side, feeding the animals, tending to the fields, and repairing fences. Their partnership had grown into a natural rhythm, each learning from the other, each respecting the other's strengths. Yet, as calm as life had become, a shadow of tension quietly lingered, waiting for the right moment to surface. It arrived one afternoon in the form of a traveling trader, a man named Samuel, who had stopped at the ranch to sell supplies and goods. He was a talkative man, quick to make conversation and curious about newcomers. When he saw Ayana, he paused, staring for a moment too long before clearing his throat. "Is she traveling with you?" he asked Jack, his tone more like a question than concern. Jack stiffened slightly. "Yes," he replied simply. "She needed shelter. She's staying here for now." Samuel raised an eyebrow, glancing at Ayana with a mix of curiosity and judgment. "I see. Well, I happen to know folks back where she comes from. You might want to be careful about how long she stays." Ayana's eyes narrowed, and she straightened her posture. "I am capable of making my own decisions," she said calmly. Her voice had a firmness to it that made Jack glance at her with a mix of pride and relief. She did not need defending. She defended herself. Jack nodded slowly. I understand. And I trust her to make the right choice. Samuel shrugged, sensing he was not welcome in the conversation. He moved on to the supplies, leaving the two of them in a tense silence. Jack felt a flicker of irritation, not at the trader, but at the reminder that the world outside the ranch still carried prejudice, suspicion, and assumptions. He glanced at Ayanna, noticing the way her eyes met his, steady and unafraid. Despite the trader's remarks, she had not flinched. The rest of the day passed quietly, but the encounter lingered in Jack's mind. He realized how easy it could have been for someone to take advantage of the situation, for others to question Ayanna's presence or his own motives. He had felt protective before, but now that protection carried a new weight, the awareness that the world beyond the ranch could challenge both of them. That evening, Jack brought up the subject gently as they sat by the fire in the cabin. "Are you all right?" he asked, watching her carefully. Ayanna nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "I am. That man's words don't change anything here. I know my choices, and I trust myself to make them." Jack leaned back, sighing softly. "I want you to know I don't intend to control you. I only want you to be safe, to feel comfortable here." Ayanna smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth turning upward. "I know, and I appreciate it. But you must remember that I am not yours to control. We are equals here, even if your instincts tell you otherwise." Jack felt a rush of humility, realizing the truth in her words. He had always been a man used to solitude, where decisions were his alone, and no one questioned him. Now he had someone in his life who demanded not only his respect, but also his understanding. And he realized that love, or connection of any kind, was not about possession, but about mutual respect. The next morning, Jack awoke to the sound of Ayanna moving quietly around the cabin. She was preparing a small breakfast, humming softly to herself. Jack watched her for a moment, admiring her independence and the way she carried herself. There was strength in her, a quiet resilience that reminded him that she was capable of much more than he had first assumed. "Good morning," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "Morning," she replied, smiling faintly. "I thought we could start the day early. There's work to do before the heat sets in." Jack nodded, appreciating her initiative. Together, they moved through the chores with efficiency, a harmony that had grown naturally over the past weeks. But beneath the rhythm of daily life, Jack felt a subtle tension building, an awareness that the outside world might soon intrude again, testing both Ayanna's independence and their fragile partnership. That test came sooner than he expected. A letter arrived one morning, delivered by a rider from the nearest town. Ayanna opened it with a steady hand, but Jack could see the flicker of emotion cross her face: surprise, concern, and a touch of longing. "It's from my family," she said quietly, showing him the envelope. "They want me to return. They're worried, I suppose, and they've made arrangements for me to come back." Jack's stomach tightened. He had expected challenges from outsiders, but seeing the letter in her hands made it real. He knew he could not, and should not, try to force her to stay. To do so would betray the trust she had placed in him, the bond they were building. "I see," he said carefully, keeping his voice calm. "What do you want to do?" Ayanna looked down at the letter, then back at him. "I don't know. I want to stay, but I also want to honor my family. I must make a choice that feels right for me, not just for them or for you." Jack nodded, feeling both fear and admiration. She was firm yet thoughtful. "Whatever you choose," he said gently, "I will support you. You have every right to decide your path." The days that followed were tense, but honest. They spoke openly about possibilities, fears, and hopes. Jack admitted his own struggles with letting someone into his life, his fear of losing the quiet independence he had always valued. Ayana spoke of the pull of family, of the responsibility she felt, and the desire to honor her roots without giving up the life she was beginning to build at the ranch. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence, Ayana paused and looked at him, her eyes serious. "Jack, I want you to know. Staying here with you is not about needing protection. I stay because I trust you, because I feel we are equals. That is what matters." Jack felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say more, to assure her that his feelings were not about possession, but about care and respect. But he nodded, letting her words settle. He understood that love and connection were not commands. They were choices made freely. The tension reached its peak when another visitor arrived, a man claiming to know about Ayana's family and insisting she return immediately. Jack felt his protective instincts flare, but he caught himself, remembering Ayana's words. This was not about control. It was about trust, respect, and allowing her to make her own decisions. "You do not have the right to decide for her," Jack said firmly, his tone calm but resolute. Ayana stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "I can handle this," she said, her voice steady. "You have done enough for me already. Let me make my choice." Jack nodded, swallowing the rush of emotions that surged through him. He realized then that his love for her was not about ownership, but about freedom, allowing her to make her own decisions while knowing she could choose to be by his side. That night, they sat by the fire in silence, the weight of the day lingering between them. The stars shone brightly overhead, a reminder of the vast world outside the ranch, full of challenges and choices. Jack reached for Ayana's hand, and she allowed it, a quiet affirmation of trust and connection. "You're stronger than I imagined," Jack said softly. "And you're learning," she replied, a faint smile on her lips. "We're both learning." By the end of the week, Ayana had made her choice. She would stay at the ranch not because she was forced, not because she owed anyone, but because she wanted to. She wanted to explore the life they were building together, to share the work, the quiet moments, and the connection that had grown between them. Jack felt a wave of relief and gratitude. He had learned that true partnership was built on respect, trust, and mutual understanding. He was not alone, and he had not lost his independence. He had gained a companion who challenged him, inspired him, and chose to be with him freely. As they watched the sun set over the fields, the warm light painting the land in shades of gold and orange, Jack realized that the ranch, the land, and even himself had changed. Life was no longer just about survival or solitude. It was about connection, choice, and the courage to let someone in. Ayana leaned against him, a quiet comfort in the fading light. They did not need to speak. Their bond was clear. The challenges of the world beyond the ranch could wait. For now, they had each other, and that was enough. Word count: approximately 1:305. The morning light broke gently over the ranch, painting the fields with a warm golden hue. Birds called from the trees, and the soft rustle of grass in the breeze carried a sense of calm and quiet that only life in the open country could offer. Jack woke early, as usual, stepping outside to check on the animals. The horse whinnied softly as he approached, and the cows stirred in the pasture. Life on the ranch was steady, peaceful, and, thanks to Ayana, full of warmth he had never known. Ayana emerged from the cabin shortly after, carrying a small basket of eggs and moving with her usual grace. Jack watched her for a moment, admiring the calm confidence she exuded. She had become part of the rhythm of the ranch, not as a visitor or someone he protected, but as an equal, a partner in the life they were building together. "Good morning," Jack said, tipping his hat with a small smile. "Good morning," Ayana replied, her eyes bright and clear. She held out the basket. "I gathered some eggs for breakfast." Jack took the basket, feeling a quiet gratitude. "Thank you. You make this place feel alive in ways I didn't know it needed." Ayana smiled faintly. "And you've shown me that a home can be more than a shelter. It can be a place where we grow, together or apart if we choose to." Her words carried weight, and Jack nodded. It was true. Life on the frontier could be lonely and harsh, but it could also be shared, if one was willing to open their heart. And he had learned, through patience and understanding, that love and companionship were not about possession, but about choice. They began their day with the usual chores, moving through them with ease. Jack worked with the horses, brushing them down and checking their hooves, while Ayana tended the smaller animals and prepared the barn for the morning feeding. There was a quiet harmony between them, the kind that comes only from trust, respect, and time spent together. Even in the simplest tasks, sweeping the barn, gathering firewood, mending fences, there was a sense of shared purpose and quiet joy. By late morning, they paused to rest in the shade of an old oak tree near the edge of the property. The wind moved gently through the branches, and the sunlight dappled the ground around them. Ayana leaned back against the trunk, her face lifted to the sky. Jack sat beside her, feeling the warmth of her presence beside him. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. Ayana opened her eyes, turning to look at him. "And you've changed too," she replied. "I see it in the way you care, not just for the land, but for life itself. You've opened your heart, Jack." He smiled, a mixture of humility and gratitude. "I never realized how much I needed that. I thought I was content alone, but having someone to share this with, even in small ways, makes everything richer." Ayana's eyes softened. "It does, but it must be done carefully. We cannot force feelings or decisions. That is the lesson we've both learned." Jack nodded. "Yes, that's true. And I've learned to trust you, to respect your choices." For a moment, they sat in silence, letting the quiet of the plains wrap around them. There was a comfortable silence, full of understanding and unspoken words. Jack felt a sense of peace that he had not known in years. The ranch, the land, and the animals were important, yes, but it was the shared presence, the connection with Ayana, that made it truly feel like home. After lunch, they turned their attention to repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. The work was hard but satisfying. Each nail hammered and plank secured a small victory. Ayana moved with skill and precision, her hands steady and sure. Jack watched her, impressed by her natural ability and her willingness to learn from him without losing her own instincts. Together they made the work lighter, sharing laughter and small conversations that strengthened their bond. As the afternoon faded into evening, Jack suggested they take a walk along the stream that ran through the ranch. The water sparkled in the sunlight, reflecting the golds and oranges of the sky. Ayana walked beside him, her steps careful but confident, the breeze playing with the ends of her braid. They spoke little, letting the beauty of the land fill the space between words. "I never thought I could feel this way about a place," Jack said finally, breaking the silence. Ayana looked at him, curiosity in her eyes. "And how do you feel about it now?" "Different," he admitted. "It's not just the land. It's the life we share here. You've made me see that. That connection. It's more than I ever expected." Ayana smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the light of the setting sun. And you've given me a place where I feel I belong, not because I'm forced to, but because I choose to be here. That is a rare gift." Jack reached for her hand, and she allowed it, their fingers intertwining naturally. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried more meaning than words could express. It was a promise, a quiet acknowledgement of the trust and care they had built together. That night they sat by the fire in the cabin, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. Jack spoke little, but every word was thoughtful, filled with care and honesty. Ayana responded with her usual quiet confidence, and their conversation flowed like the stream outside, gentle and steady. They spoke of the land, the animals, and the plans for the coming weeks, but also of dreams, hopes, and the small joys they found in each other's presence. Jack realized that his life, once defined by isolation and routine, had transformed in ways he had never imagined. The ranch, the land, and even the hardships they faced were now shared, infused with meaning and companionship. Ayana's presence had not only changed the rhythm of the days but also softened the edges of his heart, teaching him patience, respect, and the true value of choice in relationships. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew stronger. They faced small challenges together, storms that threatened the crops, animals that needed care, and the occasional visitor who questioned Ayana's presence. But through each challenge they communicated, respected each other's strengths, and leaned on their partnership. Jack learned to step back when needed, to let Ayana take the lead in situations where her insight and judgment were best. Ayana learned to trust Jack's experience and judgment, realizing that his guidance was not control, but support. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and purple, Jack and Ayana walked together to the top of a small hill overlooking the ranch. The fields stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. "This land has changed me," Jack said quietly. Ayana turned to him, her eyes gentle. "And it has changed us both. But the greatest change is in how we see each other, how we choose to be together." Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words and the truth within them. "I never imagined I could feel this way," he admitted. "Not just about a person, but about sharing life with someone. You've taught me that connection isn't about possession, it's about respect and trust." Ayana smiled faintly. "And you've taught me that choosing to stay somewhere or with someone is a powerful decision. It is not obligation or fear. It is love in its truest form." They stood together in the fading light, hands entwined, hearts aligned. The ranch, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a home built not only of wood and earth, but of trust, respect, and shared life. They had faced challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty, but through it all, they had chosen each other freely. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Jack and Ayana returned to the cabin. The fire had been renewed, casting warmth and light across the small room. They sat together, sharing stories and laughter, their presence a comfort and reassurance to each other. The quiet of the frontier no longer felt empty. It was filled with life, connection, and the promise of the future. Before retiring for the night, Jack looked at Ayana, seeing the woman who had come into his life at the station, uncertain and wary, now confident, strong, and willing to share this life with him. She had chosen to be there, and in doing so, had created a bond stronger than any he had known. "I'm glad you stayed," he said softly. Ayana smiled, squeezing his hand. "So am I. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And that makes all the difference." Jack nodded, feeling the truth in her words. They were equals, partners, and companions. The journey ahead would not always be easy, but together they had learned that love was not possession, but respect, not control, but trust, not demand, but choice. As they settled into their separate beds that night, they were aware of each other's presence nearby, a comforting knowledge that neither had to face the world alone. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, the animals settled for the night, and the stars shone brightly above. Life on the ranch was steady, full of challenges, yes, but also full of beauty, companionship, and the quiet joy of being seen and chosen. Jack closed his eyes, a sense of peace settling over him. The frontier was still wild, unpredictable, and sometimes harsh, but it had also become a place of connection, growth, and love. And as he drifted to sleep, he knew that for the first time in his life he was truly at home, not just in the land, but in the heart of another person who had chosen to share this journey with him. The days would continue, filled with work, small joys, and shared moments, but the foundation they had built together would carry them through every challenge.